Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. Joining me on this episode is Jonathan Berman, director of the newly restored documentary Commune. Originally released in 2005, the film has been newly restored with vibrant sound and picture quality and is currently making the rounds at movie houses across the U.S. Commune chronicles the story of Black Bear Ranch, launched in 1968 with the help from luminaries like the Doors, Frank Zappa, and the Monkees. This abandoned gold mine transformed into a hub for radical living, fueled by the motto, "Free land for free people." The film is packed with rare interviews, including with well-known actor and frequent documentary narrator Peter Coyote, as well as home movies and candid stories that unpack the contradictions, challenges, and wild hopes behind the commune movement. From free love and experiments in co-parenting to the practical struggles of survival, Commune lets viewers consider what it really takes to build and sustain genuine community. Here's the trailer.
I'll tell you a story if you want to hear a story.
Yeah, we don't want to hear a story that's going to last all week.
No, it won't. But this is the God's truth.
We came here because we're opposed to the murder of Vietnamese and to the murder of black Americans and all young Americans who are subject to the draft.
I mean, what are the cops going to do?
After going to Washington, D.C. for a while and thinking, boy, it's going to be a long time before all these people retire and get out of here and something changes, so I don't think I can stand to wait around.
We thought the government was going to be overthrown in 2 years, and there would be a new culture rising from the ashes, and we wanted to have an alternative, a non-mercantile alternative that offered citizens the options of being something other than a consumer or an employee.
I moved there to get away from America. I just did not want to be an American as defined by the mainstream. Although I guess deep down I've always felt, that proud that I'm an American, but to me those values are represented in open-mindedness and free thinking and tolerance and the ability to do what you want.
For those unable to catch Commune at one of its movie house screenings this summer, Jonathan tells me we can expect the documentary to be available for streaming sometime later this year. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And as always, if you're enjoying this podcast, please do like, share, follow, leave a review. Now on to my conversation with Jonathan Berman. Jonathan Berman, welcome to Making Media Now.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
It's good to be speaking with you about your film Commune, which tells the story of a commune, a utopian community, as it were, that was set up in 1968. But as we're talking about the 2025 version of Commune, we're actually talking about a restored film that you made back in 2005. So bring us back to 2005 and tell us a little bit about what was going on with you in terms of your interests as a filmmaker, that you became interested in this commune, this communal living experience that these folks had in Northern California beginning in 1968.
I will start off by readily admitting that I'm not the kind of person who would probably live in a group situation like that. However, what I loved about this place and what brought us to it, the Black Bear Ranch Commune, was that it exemplified, almost indexed in a whole Earth catalog way, if anyone remembers that.
Sure.
Find it on the internet. Every movement, every idea, every manifesto of the era all showed up on this one place. I mean, partially because everybody there was coming out of the 50s and they just wanted to break through the stultifying, McCarthy-esque suburbia.
Yeah, so 1968, it's a huge year in the U.S. in terms of social upheaval. You know, Woodstock hadn't taken place yet, but RFK had been assassinated. Martin Luther King had been assassinated. The Vietnam War was in full fettle, I guess we would say. There's the riots at the Democratic National Committee. Lyndon Johnson decides he's not going to run for president. So, you know, the times, they were a-changing. And so that was sort of the impetus for these folks that you said, the children of the 50s, who wanted to get off the grid. They wanted to create these utopian communities, and there were many of them, some way more successful than others. One thing I found interesting in your film was that how the organizers, at least some of the initial organizers of this commune, had the interest of celebrities, rock stars, and some actors that actually went toward helping them finance the purchase of the land. How did those relationships work?
Well, I think that it's there's some kind of who was it, like Admiral Perry or somebody said that, you know, once you commit, all kinds of resources show up to help you.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Once you really commit to something like filmmaking, like, oh my God, every film's a miracle. Every feature film, be it fiction or documentaries, independent, I'm talking about. Well, I think that they were good hustlers, and I forgot who it was. Somebody at the ranch grew up with Linda Ronstadt.
Okay.
And I think she might have been a good entry in there. Also, you know, the cult world, and Blackbear wasn't a cult, by the way, but the cult world has this concept known as flirty fishing.
Okay.
And I remember somebody said that, like, Antonioni or somebody was very entranced with Elsa.
Okay.
Elsa Marley is one of the two founders, you know. And so I think any which way you can, sometimes the way is to stay at their... Everybody wanted back then, right, to have some hippies around. Well, when was Manson?
69. Oh, actually, yeah, 69.
Yeah, so the doors were open,
sure,
all around LA and San Francisco and all that. People, hey, last week we had the opera stars, and this week we have hippies here, you know.
Yeah,
but they weren't really hippies in a way. I mean, yes, they were, but it was, you know, you talked about organization before, but it was really like unorganized anarchy, or an attempt to put some kind of structure on anarchy that never quite worked, which I think was to their benefit. And luckily, Richard Marley and Elsa Marley, who basically, you know, found the land and sort of led the charge. They were very hands-off leaders. Nobody was taking the leadership because everybody came there for a very different reason.
Yeah. Yeah, give us a sense of each of their background. There are a couple, Elsa and Richard Marley, prior to moving to this piece of land.
Elsa was this very talented artist, and still is, and Richard had been a labor organizer in New York and the docks in Oakland. And Richard's dad was very progressive. In fact, he was one of the first people kicked out of the United States under the McCarran Act, which was like before McCarthyism. So it was a very committed group. Elsa committed to art. Richard committed to justice.
And what was your knowledge of or your impression of hippies or hippies living off the grid back in 2005 when you originally made this documentary? What preconceived notions about these quote unquote types of people did you bring into the experience, and maybe what did you learn that you didn't know before?
Well, I mean, hippie can be a very dismissive term, but just to give you some background on myself, I was raised in Long Island, suburban Long Island. And, by the time I was 13, I was playing in psychedelic rock bands and smoking pot and doing all the things you do when you're young and wild. And so those guys who were older than me, because I was at the tail end of the baby boom, those guys were like role models, for us. We would have like tripping parties and stuff in our friend's basement, or we'd go see the Grateful Dead and they were still playing in like 5,000 seat arenas for like $10, and very young and very into all that. Also Abby Hoffman, other role models, other more maybe unlikely ones like Bugs Bunny and Groucho Marx and Mad Magazine. So all these influences combined to make me into a counterculture dude as a child, you know. And then as part of that, I suppose as part of that, or just my natural inclination, I went to McGill University in Montreal just to get out of the country for a while, because I knew if I went to a state school, I would be with all the people I grew up with who were fine, but it was just, we were the heads in the back of the cafeteria, right? So
the subject matter was very much in a line with your somewhat subversive take on life in the United States.
Absolutely, yeah. And also my background being Jewish, there was and is a very much, in spite of what's horrors that are happening overseas, a large social justice component to Judaism, to Jewish culture, American Jewish culture, and because of that, I felt like that Rabbi Hillel dictum, whatever. If not me, then who? If not now, then when? Right. And it's so. Black Bear Ranch, everybody came for a different reason. Some came to be herbalists and experimented on everybody with various herbs. And luckily, nobody died, right? And others came to foment the revolution that was surely going to happen. But the weird thing, Michael, is that so many of the things from that era of the ideas have just seeped into consciousness. So whereas, my work is about redefining history and challenging history. So the history is like, oh yeah, they were stoned and that was a terrible, weird time. And in fact, my co-producer, Christian Ettinger, was saying the other day, I was asking, what was it like growing up in San Francisco? It must have been awesome, right? And he was like, well, he's a little younger than me. He was like, well, it was kind of scary. You had Jim Jones and you had a lot of unsettled, off-the-wall people. So, there is that dark side of it, which you do see in the film. It is the first film, as far as I know, modern film dealing with communes, and then part of the film, occult challenges their status.
So as I recall from the film, originally there were about a dozen people who had this idea that they were going to buy this plot of land and live in this intentional fashion. It ended up being about 40 people who originally settled in, and very quickly grew to over 100 people. And one of the things I found really interesting about the film was that it didn't matter the year. It didn't matter how the folks sort of perceived themselves or what the rest of society might have called them or labeled them as, certain dynamics around human behavior inevitably rise to the fore. You know, there are people that are driven by idealism. There are people that are driven by maybe opportunism or escapism, or even ego, particularly in the instance of the group that shows up toward the end, which we'll get into, that's led by a guy named Gridley Wright, which could literally be called a cult. But again, we'll talk about that as we move through the chat. But what did you learn as you were making the film back in 2005 around how those various personality types began to emerge, and what kind of tensions and opportunities that create, you know, within the entire group of people?
Yeah, well, I think a great example of it is like, okay, well, you know, I always say, like, I don't think they said utopia, but I'm saying you're looking for, let's say, your own personal utopia. But for one guy, it's playing the piano and learning classical music, you know, for 4 hours a day in a robe. And then because we're going to need art in the new world that we're creating, right? And somebody else, it's like, hey, we need food in the new world, so I'm going to go deal with the garden. So why do you get to play piano while I'm gardening?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And there was an instance where some of the members actually got on Elsa because, as you mentioned earlier, she was an artist. And being an artist felt like too much of an individual act of expression, that if you're in a communal, you know, setting, even the art that emerges from that setting should have some feeling of community.
Yeah, right. And to me, that smacks of old Soviet Union, you know, like,
collectivism.
Yeah, they had that great art movement. Was that what it was? And but you had to like approve it.
Right. Exactly. Art by committee. That always works.
Once art has to be approved, you're in deep trouble, which is, you know, could lead us to talking about why we released the film now. I feel like with the events happening in the U.S., like sliding towards authoritarianism.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have at it. Yeah, absolutely.
This is the time. I'm not saying everyone should go live together in the woods, but I think for any political spectrum, it's a good idea to be able to handle both the physicality of living in the woods as well as the emotional and spiritual elements of it. Speaking of spiritual, this was not a spiritual group, and I think that was one of the pluses. I mean, people had their own whatever, but it wasn't like we're all following a mystic leader, you know.
One thing
thought that was weird. That's just Canoli says that in the film, one of the participants.
Well, I think a lot of the stereotypes that is the byproduct of documentaries and also feature film treatments, or even say treatments in novels of communal living around those times. Inevitably, a spiritual leader will emerge or try to assert his or herself, and that's where the egoism comes into play. But that is not the case at Black Bear.
Well, it seemed like there was definitely egos around, you know, everyone has egos. And, you know, it was also still a very male-oriented, male-dominated world coming out of the 50s. When they first got there, the women were like, stand by your man, right? And then as it went on, women emerged to become the first firefighters, or female firefighters in the state of California. So they weren't slacking, you know? Yeah. But, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Back in 2005, when you set out to make this film, what kind of assets did you have access to in terms of footage from the actual commune during those days, and what was the feeling around some of the participants? Some of them are quite high profile. I would say probably the most high profile being Peter Coyote, who a lot of people, if they don't recognize him as an actor, he may be one of those faces that you look and you say, oh my God, I've seen that guy in a bunch of movies.
Everything.
Or if you've been listening closely, you've heard him narrate dozens and dozens of particularly PBS documentaries, but documentaries across all broadcast outlets.
Yeah. So what was the question again? Sorry. I got lost.
I was curious about, first of all, how you went about getting getting your hands on all of the video or the film assets or the stills and the music, and also how the participants from 68 to say 72 or later into the 70s felt about talking about the experience in 2005.
I, as a documentarian, one of my key beliefs is that everybody wants to tell their story. They just don't want to be made fun of. They want to be heard, you know?
Sure.
So I think you were asking how it got made. Well, we found the book, Christian, the co-producer, and I found this book called Free Land for Free People, Free Land, Free Love. So that title alone also goes back to what you were just saying, and the exploitation of the counterculture,
right?
For various reasons, including making money by people like Roger Corman, right, and all that. So that's why their pitch, just to circle back to that, when they were trying to raise money, was, "Hey, you guys play us in movies and TV and all that, and now it's time to pay the piper."
Somebody said you've been making money off of us being the hippies, and the people that were making money, were the Doors and the Monkees, et cetera. The folks that maybe they lived a hippie lifestyle, but they were very well compensated for it.
Yeah, well, it's a good pitch. You had to have a good pitch.
Yeah.
So we got up to a reunion. Somebody was like, I think Cannoli might have been my first very friendly contact, and he was like, "Come up, we're doing a reunion, and you could meet everybody, and we'll all see what we think." So we didn't know they were going to have 100 people in a circle and put us in the middle, like in the hot seat.
Yeah.
Kind of the confrontational side of 60s therapy, right? And they said, "You're the media. What are you doing here? You're here to exaggerate and make us look bad." And we're like, no, we're not here for that. We had to explain our way out into it.
Yeah.
And so that happened, but we didn't know about necessarily any assets at all. It's just, again, commit to something and stuff will arrive. So as we're making the film, oh yeah, it's like a crazy scenario. It was like I was in Black Bear Ranch as we were making the film, because I showed them a cut of the movie, which I'm not doing now with the new films. I'm going a little more journalistic on my new project, where you don't share it. There's that case with Joe Berlinger and the Chevron film, and he showed a cut of it and then it got ruled like a promotional film in New York courts. So,
oh yeah.
So you got to be careful. But I did do that back then. And one guy was like, "Well, look, why don't you move this scene here, cut that scene, put this here?" And then someone else was like, "Well, can you get a new video camera and start again?" And then someone else, it was just like crazy. It was like tearing my hair out. And then finally Elsa was like, "Leave Jonathan alone. He's making his art." So we had a taste of being at Black Bear from that, because that's the way this kind of stuff went over there. Like, there would be a decision made, and then people would just do what they do.
What's your knowledge of how many of the folks that were originally involved are, first of all, still around, and what their take is? Because I know that, as we said, the version of the film that's making the rounds throughout the country right now is fully restored. It looks great. It sounds great. Was there any thinking to maybe involving contemporaneous interviews with any participants, if they were around, meaning alive, and if they were willing to participate?
I didn't want to mess with the movie. I feel like it plays. We did kind of a first screening at Upstate Films in Rhinebeck, New York. And people seemed to be following the story. Nobody was checking their phone. There was interest. People talked for an hour after the film, after the Q&A. So I thought these were all good signs, and I didn't want to mess with it. There's one or two things I wouldn't mind making a little clearer or longer, but yeah, you'd have to see the film, and then I could talk to you about it, which, by the way, is playing theatrically in California. It's playing, I don't know when the pod's coming out, but we're playing in Hudson, New York this Saturday, the 18th of August. And this whole week, we're playing in Long Beach, California, which has its own intriguing history where Social Security was born through the ham and eggs movement. But anyway, a little side note. But
feel free to sneak it in.
Well, one of the things that happens for me is that I like to just start with a blank slate, and I just follow all these different paths. I became a real counterculture expert and wound up actually being on some show on History Channel, some TV show talking about cults and communes and counterculture and all that, the 3 C's. But,
so what do you see as the difference between a cult and a commune? Because a lot of folks will use those terms interchangeably. And your film isn't really about a cult.
There is a cult that does arrive, as you mentioned. It does arrive, right? Yes. And the Shiva Lila, and they had a spiritual magnetic leader. Look, 80% of the people want to follow. That's just the way it is, including people in the film business. They'll follow the last hit. What's happening? What was the shark movie? Let's do another shark movie. Quick. So most people want to follow. So it's understandable. And like we were talking about before, ego and all that. So you find someone with ego who's got the spiritual mumbo jumbo, which they either believe or they don't, and you have a recipe for disaster. You can have a cultic commune, right? Many were.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting question. I mean, there's a bunch of things you would ask, like, do you have contact with people from the outside world?
Yes, exactly.
Is that encourage or discourage? If it's discourage, that's a really bad sign,
Yeah. One of the key, I would say, plot points really in your film is when children start being born into the commune and how that changes priorities for the parents of these children. And it almost forces kind of a philosophical consideration of how these children should be raised relative to the values of the commune. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That was a definitely a turning point. I mean, I think a lot of the work that was being done in these communal settings was about child raising and all that. If you look at the kibbutz movement in Israel, they would have the kids live separately. They were communes in a way. So everybody was wondering how to deal with kids. There was Benjamin Spock's book and all kinds of new ideas. Ridley Wright's idea, who came, the cult that came to Black Bear, was like, you take LSD and you worship gods, and I'm your spiritual leader.
Yeah, and he didn't have kids.
He didn't. No, they were all his kids. Yeah,
they were all his kids. Spoken like a true cult leader.
Yeah, right, exactly. Oh yeah, it's very like the. So yeah, stuff showed up. So Elsa was like, "There's this guy, and I think she was a great ally to the project because it's art, right?
Sure,
creative documentary, hopefully, craft maybe. But she's like, somebody has old video they shot traveling from commune to commune, almost like a Telegram or Pony Express, where you'd say hi to your friends in Colorado or something. Oh, there was a big cultic commune in Boston, by the way. I know you're up in that area. Yeah. I mean, they were all over. So, but anyway, we found this guy, and he was cool, and we paid him a small fee, and we got this footage that was on Portapack, like the first portable video format, and the oxide was peeling off, and the last machine was at the Bay Area Video Coalition. Thank you, Bay Area Video Coalition. And we managed to transfer it. And in fact, we do have a bunch of footage that should be given to the Smithsonian or something, because we have a lot of Native American stuff. We got the footage and we were like, oh no. Our first editor, Marissa Simpson, and we were like, there's only 10 minutes of Black Bear in like these 15 hours.
Oh, wow.
But then you realize, wait a minute, that's Cedar and that's Cannoli, and they're 20 here, and we're filming them when they're 50 or 45 or something. So it makes a huge difference to see somebody young and then old and cut back and forth between them. You get to see them in their prime, and I think that makes a big difference to how the film plays. So there was that footage. The other footage was from a newsreel. I think it's now California newsreel, and that's public domain footage. And then we had this is for our filmmaking people, which is probably most of your people, right? Or lovers of film. There was a very talented filmmaker named Robert Kramer, who was an avant-garde filmmaker based in New York. And, there's a lot of New York connections. The whole film was actually made in New York. We could actually we could have got, if they had them back then, we could have gotten a tax subsidy on this thing.
Yeah.
Except for shooting at the Black Bear Ranch. But, there's, Robert Kramer was in the Lower East Side of New York and made this film called Milestones. And in this film, it was like almost a Studs Terkel travelogue. And he's like with Polish women in factories in Chicago, but he's also at the Black Bear Ranch. And that's where you have that 16 millimeter color footage of like the naked acupuncture and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of naked, I have to say.
Yeah.
No shortage of naked in the film.
Thank God. It's so hot out now. I mean,
which actually brings up one of the other really crucial dynamics of the film, which brings us again back to these enduring aspects of human nature, in the way relationships are formed. There was almost this, the place wasn't big on rules, but sort of an unspoken or unwritten, but maybe spoken rule was you couldn't sleep with the same person more than 2 nights in a row, because that would constitute a relationship, and relationships were too bourgeois for this crew. That had to have all sorts of tension and fallout, both at the time, and I'm wondering what stories you heard about that when you were making the film back in 2005.
Couple of different stories. One is that was spoken by Peter Coyote, who was a participant in, Brethren or whatever at Black Bear. He had his own communal scene further south, but he also was there a lot, and they were like his brothers and sisters. And when we filmed with Peter, he was just like, he didn't even look at the release. He just signed it. He's like, yeah, I'll do anything for those guys. So
okay.
So we're hoping Peter will come to Sebastopol, and that's the September weekend of the 12th, all over the Bay Area, right? Where are we? We're in Sebastopol. We're in Berkeley in the 60s. And
we will make sure in the program notes episode to get all those dates in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess a point to that is Peter says there's blood. You do that for a while, and then ultimately there's blood over. I may be confusing 2 films, but because I have another film about my childhood friend who robbed a bunch of banks in Boston, and he does the same. It's interesting. It's the same imagery, throwing a glass of juice against the wall.
Coyote definitely talks about orange juice.
Yeah,
in relation to.
So he does, and like you bitch or something because you're jealous.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's human beings. We get jealous and all that. This generation may be doing better with that. It seems like there's a lot more. I don't know, polygamous relationships and stuff. I don't really know how that.
One of the stereotypes of, and maybe it's a stereotype because there's a huge chunk of truth in it, I don't know, from the hippie movement, back to the garden movement, that they had their time in the, out in nature, they had their years of free love and free sex and drugs and so forth, and then they all went and became yuppies and destroyed the world for everybody else. What's your take on that? And knowing that notion may prevail, what is your hope for folks in 2025 as they're viewing this film and they see it as something more than just kind of nostalgic kitsched?
I think when we released it in 2005 in the unrestored version, the restoration is just looks really great and sounds great. So was that then it was like almost a curio. Nobody had really re-examined the 60s, or they had maybe, but not in this way. So it was all new, but it was wasn't that important. Right now, I feel like it's super important because people are looking for real alternatives. Corporations have taken over our housing markets. And corporations, as we saw in the amazing film The Corporation, are, if you didn't know it, they have to maximize profit. That's part of,
that
especially
is
if you're
fiduciary responsibility
as public, if they're publicly held. Yeah. And so, rents are just skyrocketing. We don't, so people are looking for alternatives, maybe going to the woods, maybe living together. But beyond that, also just celebrating some of the wins, like feminism you see that emerging at Black Bear Ranch. So you see kind of totemic versions of all these ideas coming to fruition. healing, natural healing. Michael Tierra wrote The Way of Herbs and popularized echinacea. Ephraim and Harriet Korngold had a book, it was called East West. Oh, geez, I'll find it. But very popular book about acupuncture and helped legalize it. So this particular crew did not return to the couch and smoke marijuana and watch Leave It to Beaver. maybe Head by the Monkees, okay? But they didn't do that. They did a lot of good things in the world, are continuing to do so. Now, getting back to the free love thing, which, I remember Cecilia, and she's the gal who's kind of torn. She's taken away by the cult, in a very harrowing moment in the movie. She just laughed and said, yeah, yuck. That's just something like our parents talked about it or did. But, to say that was a maxim or a dictum, there weren't any. It was like, this month, everybody is going to be vegetarian. And then for 3 weeks later, it's like, let's all become meat eaters.
Well, there was that hilarious group meeting about what to do with the cow.
Oh, yeah. Don't ruin it.
In the end, I won't ruin it. I will say that the answer is kind of provided for them by the end of the meeting.
Oh, I know. And that's another thing from the 60s that maybe you don't get enough of. You get a touch of that whole idea of like kismet, synchronicity. Yeah. But I do believe in that to a degree. I'm part woo-woo, but I'm also from New York, so I don't.
It's a good balance.
Yeah.
the New York will keep you honest.
Yeah, something like that. But just throwing all this footage together was a task, and thank God I had two good editors, and was able to just sit with it myself. What I like to do, just as far as process goes, is I like to do a cut. It's usually awful, but then I know the footage at least, right?
Sure.
And maybe even a few sequences that I cut remain in the film if they work. And then I give the material to the editors and say, okay, make a film. Here's what it's about. Here's the points. But one of the things you were saying before about the different characters, I have somewhere, I hope I didn't throw it out. Like I made like an insane chart of every participant in the film and their value shift. Like this is like kind of getting into that whole screenwriting theory stuff from positive to negative. What's his name? William, who's the guy who's wrote that amazing book about screenwriting?
Oh, is it McKay? McGee?
McGee, yeah. We're close. And
he was a guy that made. I don't know if he actually made it as a screenwriter, but he certainly made it as a guy that would hold weekend seminars for $1,500 to teach you how to write a screenplay.
Right, you can just read the book story, but it gets real deep into it, and I use some of that stuff. I like to use the when possible, and it usually for anything that people are going to see makes sense to have some kind of beginning, middle, and end structure. But beyond that, other structures of does this character have a value shift? Does this scene have a value shift? If it doesn't, we have to fix it or lose it. Does it go from hopeful to sad?
Yeah. Well, I tell you,
sad to death defying. To life threatening.
As a parent, my kids are older now, but when you talk about a value shift, it was almost a tonal shift, at least for me in the film, when you went into the story of that young woman, I'm forgetting her name right now, who essentially is at the insistence, perhaps, of this cult that comes in, and the cult's called Shiva Leela, and led by this guy that you mentioned before, Gridley Wright, who is the leader, and basically the key to raising kids is you drop a lot of acid and the methodology will appear to you. But the young woman is essentially taken by another family. She goes to the Philippines, she's in India, and through this, I'm not going to give it away because it's in the film, through this just crazy set of coincidences, ends up pretty much back to where she started. But tonally, there was a gravitas to her story, wouldn't you agree? That kind of puts the whole experimental living in a different light in terms, insofar as, yes, for every experiment, there are intended and unintended consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what made it even harder is that one parent was, we are interested in what you guys are doing. He was a smart guy, really. It wasn't all poppycock, he had some things to say. sort of, I think.
Well, I think you have to possess a certain type of charisma if you are going to, they call it a cult of personality for a reason.
Oh yeah. And so Cecilia's mom wanted to go with them, and they went off to India.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was some tragedy there. I would give full credit to Don Maru and Wakan from the Shiva Lila who are in the film, and that was very generous of them because it's hard for them to talk about too. And Wakan had served in the U.S. military in like Cambodia or something, and killed people, women and children and stuff. So he was shell shocked, I think. So when he found this way to make a new path and this glorious leader. Except they were doing this confrontational therapy. So they came to Black Bear and they were like, they didn't say, do you guys want to play with us? We're doing this thing. They were just like, here we are. We're going to be in your face. It's creepy. It's creepy. I'm getting creeped out. And there's actually a great book. It's on archive.org. Maybe it's in other places called The Hippie Trip. And this sociologist, Yablonsky, I think, he travels around with Gridley before all this stuff. Gridley had a commune called Strawberry Fields in Malibu. So that's worth a look if you want to see the dark side. I mean, certainly a film about the Shiva Lila wouldn't be a bad idea. But those guys, they realized they messed up and they were willing to admit it in the film. Now, some of the stuff that happened in India, which I won't go into, it can happen. You can be traveling and things can happen.
And you're around the time that your film wraps up. It's the late '80s, and the Black Bear community basically signs a document guaranteeing that the group's ownership of the land in perpetuity. Has that document stood the test of time?
Yes, it has. Osha Newman, who is in the film, and I love Osha, and everybody has their great stories. Sometimes, Michael, when you're making a film, you're like, oh my God, we missed the story, the sound was off or whatever. And then a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times they're able to just tell it again because they've told it before,
Right. Yeah.
But OSHA's stuff is great. And OSHA has this storied background of American progressive thinking, and he became like a community lawyer in Berkeley, and he put together that document, and it's still standing. There's only a few people right now, from my understanding, at Black Bear Ranch. They're open to new people. You can't just show up, guys. All right. If your rent is $3,000 for a shoebox, well, you might want to rethink that. But otherwise, you can go, but you have to go to the Black Bear Ranch website, which is pretty easy.
Bring your own orange juice.
To throw against the wall. In my other film, my friend Paul robbed all these banks in Massachusetts, and another darkest hour moment in the film, he throws the orange juice against the wall after he robbed the bank and said, damn it, I wasn't going to do this anymore.
But that's where the money is, right?
And maybe it's the orange juice, Michael.
It could be. I think there's a new film.
It's very sugary.
Well, in any case, this film is called Commune, and it is making its way throughout the entire country. We will make sure that we link to the film's website, which will have all of the cities that the film will be showing. You did tease, at least for me, that sometime in the fall we're hoping to see it be available on streaming.
Yeah, probably.
If and
more
when
like
that happens,
December,
we will
November,
make sure that we update this podcast with that information also. But I've been speaking with the producer and the director of the film, Jonathan Berman. Jonathan, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much for your really well thought out questions and great conversation. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.